Hello, and welcome to the Jim Ruff Show. Today we're fortunate to have as a guest Peggy Holman, who is the co-author of this monster book, The Change Handbook, which is actually quite well known, I must tell you, internationally. So, and today our topic is open space technology. So Peggy's one of the early founders and promoters of open space technology and users. And so she's going to share with us a little bit of her history with the process and help us understand the process. And we're going to talk a little bit about how dynamic facilitation relates to it. So welcome, Peggy.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Jim.
Yeah, it's great. And I was glad to meet your husband, Neil, too. So, well, tell us a little bit about how you came upon open space technology and a little bit about your history maybe leading into it.
Sure. So I ran into open space technology during a period where I was working inside, at that time, U.S. West Communications, and had been invited to do some research on what is at the leading edge of learning organizations. And it sent me on a journey to look at what was out there in the world that was enabling groups of people to deal with complex issues and actually find answers. And during that search, one of the processes that I ran into was open space technology. And it was perhaps the most fun job I've ever had while working inside corporate America, because basically I could find these interesting processes, look for a place to bring them in and try them within our organization. And a friend of mine who was a student at Antioch, I described what I was doing working with learning organizations, and she said, "You might be interested in this." And she sent me this 3-page article from Training Magazine on open space technology. And I read it and I thought, there's something to this. And so I called Harrison Owen, who created Open Space, and described what we were doing. And he said, and we were talking about hosting a gathering in U.S. West on learning and what it means to be a learning organization. And he told me that was actually one of the first open space gatherings that they ever did was on that subject in Goa, India. Yeah. And so I had a chance to experience the process. We brought it in actually to bring the quality community within U.S. West together. It's about 70, 80 people to look at our role in the company and how we might best contribute. And the thing that I realized when I first experienced the process was I saw something that I had never seen before and didn't realize was possible, which was that the good of the individual, the good of the people in the organization, and the good of the whole could both be served. And I thought those things were always in conflict with each other. Marvelous.
So you saw the good of the individual and the good of the organization being in alignment, and you thought they were always in conflict with one another?
Yep. So it was a revelation at that time. Wow. This was back in about 1993. And since then, that's now my measure of success, is when those things match up, when those things marry up. When people can be their unique selves, and and the whole is served in some way. That's
cool.
A measure of success.
So tell us about open space then. Tell us what it is and what.
The kind of my short way of describing open space is it's a practice that enables groups of any size, and literally as small as 2 or 3 to as large as 2,100 people who can come together, address complex, important issues, and find solutions. And it does that through a very, very, very simple process of self-organization, where in the opening moments, about the first 20 minutes, is offering up 4 principles and 1 law, and then inviting people to create their own agenda of what they want to do for the day. So at its heart is the idea of people taking responsibility for what they love as an act of service.
Nice. Okay, so people are taking responsibility, and you've got 4 laws, and 1 law
Yeah.
There are four principles and one
Yeah. Yeah.
law that kind of spark this possibility or
Correct.
facilitate.
Correct.
So tell us what those are.
Sure. So actually, I'll do this in inverse order. So the
Okay.
mechanics of the process
Yeah.
are people are sitting in a circle, and we use a circle because it's the fundamental geometry of communication. There's no top, no bottom, no sides when you have a circle.
Okay.
And there's blank paper in the center and some markers, and the invitation, people convene around a topic that they care about. And the invitation then is to go in, take a blank piece of paper, write a topic, often framed as a question, because questions have a sense of invitation inherent in them. People sign their name, and they announce it to the group. And then they go to a blank wall, which becomes the agenda wall. And in the process of doing that, they choose a time and a place, post it on the wall, and once everybody who wants to has done that, you've got an agenda for a day.
Okay.
Or for multiple days even. So as you can see, the mechanics are very simple. The four principles in the law are...
Let me just check in with the mechanics again.
Yeah.
So the basic mechanics are that each person takes responsibility for themselves, and they talk about what they're interested in learning about or what they're interested in presenting about.
Correct.
And they write it down, possibly in a question, and they present it to the whole group.
Correct.
And now, and they say, I want to learn about this somewhere, sometime today or whatever.
Right.
And then I can't remember if you got into that part of the mechanics
Yeah.
or not, but they pick a sticker or something and
Correct. They choose a time and a place.
choose a time and a place.
Yep. And post it on the agenda wall.
Okay.
And once everybody who wants to do that has done so, you basically move the chairs out of the way and people can go look at the agenda and decide where they want to spend their time.
Okay. So everybody then disbands and comes and looks at the
Correct.
agenda that's been created by these
Right.
individuals and decides where they're going to spend their time.
And then at the end of the day, you come back together to reflect as a group.
I see.
And it's a process that's been used in all kinds of different settings. So early on for designing airplane doors at the Boeing Company,
Okay.
at kind of one end of the
Yeah.
spectrum.
So how many people do they have for that, say?
Actually, that was an interesting one. It was done in two different locations, and there were about 60 people in two different states.
Oh.
And
So they had one meeting, but it was two groups of 60.
Yep.
And they're each doing open space.
Yep. And that was many years ago, before technology would have allowed some of the things you could do today.
Oh, wow.
But they were connected and able to share what the sessions were going on in both of those locations. And they
Nice.
actually did come up. Their goal was to come up with a design for a door that could be used across their whole airplane line.
Nice.
Now that's kind of one end of the spectrum. At the other, I have a Russian colleague who used it to look at the future of Rotary clubs in Siberia.
Wow.
And
So what kind of gathering was that then? Do you know?
I don't know the size of that. I think there were several hundred people at that one.
Okay.
And they did indeed set an agenda for where they wanted to go with Rotary.
So you
Yeah.
need a theme to begin
Correct.
this process,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's some theme like future of Rotary clubs in Siberia.
Yeah. Yeah.
and then people interested in that theme show up somehow.
Yeah. And actually, in many ways, the work of preparing for an open space all happens before people get in the room. Because as you get clear about what's the focus of this, why are we coming together, then the question that gets asked is, who cares about this topic?
Yes.
And the principal work is doing the outreach, because one of the things that we know is that the more diversity that's present, the more opportunity for breakthrough thinking.
Okay.
And so reaching out to different constituencies who care about a particular topic is one of the keys to a rich open space, that and the clarity of the question.
Okay. Okay, so we've got a little bit about the mechanics. Now
Yeah.
give us the rules or the principles in the law.
Yeah. So the four principles actually grow out of the law, but they go like this. Whoever comes are the right people, which basically says you don't need a cast of thousands and you don't need the people at the top of a hierarchy of power to get things done. In truth, things happen when people who care come together.
Okay.
So the second principle is whatever happens is the only thing that could have. And that's really a reminder that there's no point in getting hung up on what might have been or could have been or should have been. You know, in truth, all we ever have to deal with is what is. And in fact, what I've learned through the years is to recognize that when something shows up that is in some way disturbing or irritating or annoying, to get curious about it, because that's where the juice is.
And you can create a session on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, yeah, those tend to be the breakthrough sessions.
Yeah.
And then the last two principles both have to do with time. When it starts is the right time, and when it's over, it's over. And they're really a reminder, and we've become very guided by our clocks and our watches in our culture. And this is really a reminder to try and experiment and use time as information that's useful information, but to really pay attention to your own internal rhythm and to pay attention to where your energy is and to follow that. And when you do that, because the truth of it is things actually get started when creative energy starts to flow, and it's over when that creative energy ceases to flow.
Yeah, so it's noticing. Like a lot of times I've noticed in these open spaces, they begin late because people are following their energy.
Yep.
And then so, or some people straggle in and and maybe there's 2 or 3 talking at the beginning and then it gets larger. So it's sort of just saying, okay, that kind of stuff happens when people follow their energy, and so just go with it, you know.
Exactly right, which actually leads me to the law out of which these 4 principles flow.
Okay.
And that's the law of 2 feet.
Okay.
And one way of thinking about the law of 2 feet is that it really is about a foot of passion and a foot of responsibility. And you know, the truth is, if we have passion and no responsibility, then people may have a great time, but you'll never get anything done.
Yeah.
And if you have responsibility without passion, there's sort of a deadening that goes on. So things may get done, but there isn't necessarily any life to it. It may actually not be what people want to have done.
Yes.
So when you put those 2 things together, passion and responsibility, then things come to life and they start to cook and they become productive. And one measure of that is you can think about using your 2 feet. If you're not contributing or getting value or having a good time where you are, use your 2 feet and go somewhere else. And on the other side, the flip side of that, you can also use your 2 feet to stand up for what you believe in. And it works both ways.
Okay, so the law of 2 feet really is about leaving when you're bored and going to where you're interested and not.
That's or where you can contribute.
Yeah, but I really like this idea of the passion and the responsibility. It seems like that adds, because in dynamic facilitation, for instance, we really need people to stay the whole time. You know, I mean, to have it breaks the container to have people in and out and ruins it for everybody. So, it can. We have to be careful about that. So I've always had a little. You know, I want to tell people at the beginning of in an open space session that this is maybe a little bit different. Go ahead and honor your energy, but take that energy and tell us what you're upset about, or tell us why you're leaving, or help us incorporate that, because this is really a group process.
And it's interesting you mention it, because in both senses it's a group process. It's just, where do you draw the boundary? And so in a sense, the whole circle, an open space meeting, particularly if it's multiple days, and you know, in a few hours or a day, you can have a great conversation. In 2 days, you begin to, you know, come up with breakthroughs, and in 2.5 days or more, things really start to cook in terms of, you know, finding the direction, starting to move into action, and so thinking in terms of always beginning and ending the day as a whole. Those become collective reflection times. So whatever is going on in the small groups creates a buzz in the in-between spaces. So in a sense, what you're doing is creating the conditions of self-organization, where you know, there's a network of connections and different mixes of people coming together at different times. So if someone is, for example, upset, or something gets triggered, very often those conversations end up in what are called butterfly conversations, which I hadn't talked about.
Oh, we forgot about those.
Yeah, butterflies and bumblebees, which are an offshoot of the law of 2 feet.
Okay.
Because what one of the things that happens, because people can, you know, use their energy, and the polite thing to do in open space is, if you find yourself checking out, rather than just mentally checking out, take the whole rest of you with you someplace else, follow your energy. because that ethic is in place, because that's a value in the community, you end up, one, with butterflies, and what we know about, or I'm sorry, bumblebees, what we know about bumblebees in nature is they're great cross-pollinators.
Yes.
And so I take the ideas that are coming up, or the energies of, frustration or whatever is going on for me, into another group where they may make a contribution. And then the other critter that always shows up in an open space are butterflies. And butterflies are the people who never quite make it into sessions, or maybe they're in a session for a while and something irritates them, so they use their 2 feet and they leave. And the thing we know in nature about butterflies is that they're beautiful and they attract others to them. And so if somebody is, by the food or outside in the sun, and they attract someone to them, very often those small conversations may be where I work out that irritation or frustration or something. And very often those lead to the breakthroughs that I then take back into another session, and it affects others and starts rippling through. So in a way, it's an indirect dynamic for getting at the same kind of thing you do in dynamic facilitation.
Well, I just attended an open space that you created, and Harrison was there. Harrison Owen is the creator, originator of this idea of open space technology. And it's the first time I've used this butterfly, bumblebee kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I went to less sessions than I did bumper flying and butter. I mean, just kind of hanging between sessions often. Often I found myself going to a session, but ending up talking to somebody and realizing that we were done and it was a session. So that was a good, learning for me to how to use that butterfly, bumblebee.
And it's interesting. One of the things that I notice is with time, and there is something about that core idea of taking responsibility for what you love as an act of service, when that becomes not just a methodology of how we meet, but an ethic. What does it mean to live in open space all the time? When people start having multiple experiences, what I find in practice is you do end up with more people kind of hanging at the margins, having those interesting conversations, and what goes up on the agenda wall becomes the topics where I don't really know who I want to talk to about this, but there's something important to me. And so I put it up in the marketplace, and it ends up attracting others who may have a point of view around it.
So what was the theme? Self-organizing systems.
It was leadership in a self-organizing world.
Leadership in a self-organizing world. That was the theme of the... I'm trying to give us a specific example.
Yeah. Actually, I had one pop into my mind from a very different setting that I don't know why this particular example came up, but it was with a Vietnamese Buddhist community in Huntington Beach, California. And the monk who worked with that community was responsible for 3 communities in different parts of the country. And he was frustrated because anytime he left, people didn't interact with each other. They only got together when he was in town. And he very much wanted them to grow a sense of community where they were really watching out for each other. And so a colleague, Ann Stadler, and I did a 2-day open space with this group of 60, 70 people that range from young children to 80-year-olds and everything in between. And there was one kind of magical moment, and most of the sessions were actually being held in Vietnamese, so we weren't even able to follow most of what was being discussed. But during the closing circle, as we were talking, very, very, very few of the older people would say anything in that. Well, this one woman started clearly speaking directly to the monk, and she's speaking in Vietnamese. And we found out later what she was doing was asking him for advice because she had a teenage son who was showing up with a bad crowd, and she was looking for counsel on what to do. Well, he didn't answer it directly, but one of the women who we were working with as part of our organizing group arrived the next morning really excited because what she realized was that this woman could host a session on that subject of what to do with my teenage son who's hanging out with the bad crowd.
Right.
And she very excitedly went to this woman, and the woman posted a session on it. And what she had happen was she had young people and people her own age and older people all show up at this session, and she ended up not only getting advice on ways to handling it from young people who were her son's peers, but they ended up discovering how they could be of service to each other as a community, whether the monk was in town or not.
Nice. Well, so the basic essence of open space is it's a way, a container, a facilitative container that allows people to take their interests and their passions and have that work with the group and have it come up with something that's real actions,
Yep.
and real changes. And the group could be a small group, or it could be up to, like you say, 2,100 people or something that big.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about how I used the open space that we just recently did in Leavenworth. The person that stopped me when I was on my way to a session was Joseph McCormick. I feel okay using Joseph's name. I hope that's okay. But Joseph comes out of a conservative background, and he was very angry at the left and for their shadow.
And one thing I should mention is Joseph is really a leader these days in something called the transpartisan movement,
yes.
which is about bringing together people from all aspects of the political spectrum to actually create a sense of we the people.
That's right. So yeah, and Joseph's been on this show, by the way, too. So anyway, Joseph and I got talking about this and how the left doesn't really they're not looking at their shadows so often, and of course they accuse the right of not doing that. And so he was angry and really wanted to deal with that in a way that held his anger. And so we decided to have a dynamically facilitated session on that, and I volunteered to DF it. So we went, and in the session there were a lot of people from the blue team, I suppose, and then there was Joseph being angry.
Right.
And it went really, really well in a lot of ways, but there was a lot more anger and energy than anybody had anticipated.
Yeah.
And
that's an example of the ripple effect, because that session and the productive outcomes of that session did ripple back into the rest of the session as the stories emerge from it. But you're in the midst of telling it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you for saying that. Yes, I think it was very powerful, I know, for Joseph and a lot of the people in it. And in fact, one of the persons in it got so scared, really scared and emotionally, because of her own shadow, that really what happened is that she wanted to just kill Joseph.
Yeah.
And that wasn't her, and she didn't even know about that side of herself. And so then we had another session that was DF'd around dealing with that. And Joseph was a part of that, a much calmer person, I must say, helping to work that through. Yeah. So it was just a marvelous healing that was happening within the larger conference. And it was an opportunity. I mean, everybody, you're not going to use the law of 2 feet in that setting, because people could sense this was a time that we were in a container. But it was a very, very powerful experience, and everybody there was heroic in a certain way of moving things forward.
And it's actually one of the things that I think is powerful about the example you brought up is it is an indicator. I mean, you created an environment that was, in a sense, an attractor, and so people stayed with it. And so rather than being there based on rules, they're there based on their
energy.
Their energy.
Yeah.
Which is, very consonant with my understanding of dynamic facilitation, which is very much about following energy.
Yeah, so that was really good. The other situation that I just didn't want to run out of time, but I wanted to mention one other situation that I did using dynamic facilitation in open space. My wife and I, Jean, were recently in Hong Kong, and they had an open space meeting day-long on meaningful media. There were a lot of media people there. And what the organizer wanted to do was, they didn't know what meaningful media was and didn't feel like there was enough time and wanted there to be kind of a group sense. So he had me DF for the first 50 minutes or so of the whole group so that everybody kind of got the lay of the land of what we're talking about.
I think that sounds like a fascinating way to open. And I don't know if you're aware of the work I've been doing in journalism for the past actually 9 years. I've been part of an initiative called Journalism That Matters, and we're in the midst of planning a gathering here in the Northwest. And I kind of filed away that idea because I think it might be a very intriguing way to open that particular session.
Well, it was great because then the different people would have their sessions, but the sessions were all really tied to what the group, they knew what the group wanted. And in this case, it was about changing the world in a positive way using these new technologies like games and so forth. And so it was anyway, I had to leave. A guy named Mark Pixley, tremendous open space leader and DFer now. He just been to the DF training in Singapore. So, but anyway, he followed it up and was a better follow-through person than I was because he put together the notes for everybody. But I'm getting the signal that we need to hang up.
Okay.
Just as we've started this fun territory.
I guess one thing I want to leave people with the idea with open space is if you're dealing with a complex subject, there's a lot of diversity of perspective on it, and you need to find answers. It's one of the best practices.
It's a great way to get the diverse views and different
Correct.
facts and knowledge together into one, and even in a large group.
Yep.
Peggy Holman, thank you very much for coming and sharing about this.
Oh, you bet. It's a pleasure to do it. Thanks for having me, Jim.
Okay, good. Thank you.